bad. All right. We will note Miles' attendance. Today, what I want to do, introduce the text. Hopefully you had the opportunity to watch it. It's an hour and a half, but it's on Netflix. I assume most of you are pretty familiar with getting on Netflix, making that work for you. Primarily, my goal is to prepare you for two things. Number one, I want to start the conversation about how are we even going to write this paper, what's that going to look like when we're working with this, okay, a documentary. But then number two, in the small term, if nothing else, I want to prepare you for your homework for next time, right? Because even if you don't quite understand what we're doing in the paper, if I can get you prepared for the homework every time, which I have constructed in such a way that I feel like builds toward the paper, well, I feel like by the end of all that, you'll be in a pretty good spot. That's what we're going to try to do. So then, as a little preview, your homework, the syllabus, I think it says like 3 signs and elements, something like that. This shouldn't feel too unfamiliar to you. In a lot of ways, intentionally, this is pretty similar to how we talked about Ansari, okay? We're going to watch like 2 scenes from the documentary today, right? The very opening scenes. So if you weren't able to watch for one reason or another, you will not be lost. This is how the thing starts. But all I'm really interested in you doing, and this is the part that will stress some of you out, but you might have to like write some stuff down, okay? I know. Some of you are so slowly getting the paper. Some of you are discovering right now you don't have paper or a pen. What was your plan today? You didn't have one, you know? Anyway, what I want you to do, it's really just one thing right now, and hopefully we'll move beyond this. But right now, we're going to watch the first scene. All I want you to do, to the best of your ability, jot down anything at all that strikes you as potentially interesting or significant, okay? The same way we did when we were talking about Ansari, we would look at a paragraph or a quotation, we would focus on a word or a phrase. Similar thing here, people are going to say stuff. They say anything interesting. Beyond that though, it's important to remember this is a visual medium, right? So you can see things. Do you see anything that's interesting? The way something is shot, the way something is cut. Do we look at anything while someone else is saying something else? Do you know what I mean? Like there's many more opportunities in a visual medium beyond just dialogue, beyond just quotation. So anything at all you notice here in the first scene is like 2 minutes long or something. It's not super long. Anything at all. We're going to try to warm up with that. I also have no idea how loud this is, or even how to mess with it now that we're being honest. Hey, that's how it opens, right? We're about to get, after that, sort of the opening credits and all that stuff. But the first, 2 minutes or so of the thing is what you just saw. So I'm curious, right now, and of course I have things I want you guys to think about, but I'd really love to hear from you first. Anything you notice. People say a lot of things, but there's other stuff that happens. Just anything at all you notice that piqued your interest out there in the dark.
None of them have a legitimate answer.
Do what?
None of them have a legitimate answer.
To what question?
What's the problem?
What is the problem? And it's interesting, it's not just, to put it super literally, if someone asks you a question, you always have an answer, right? And so what I mean by that is, how do they answer that question?
You see, it's a lot.
Do what?
It's a lot of things.
One guy says he wants to touch on like several things, like he wants to put it into, because when someone asks you a question like that, right, they mean they want like, a sentence or two, man, like, give it to me, what's the deal? And he kind of insinuates what about the problem, that one guy.
There's a lot of problems.
And it's not something he can just maybe boil down, right? Like that simply, okay? There's also a woman they asked the question to, and there's the red-haired guy who's in the documentary a lot. How do they respond to that question? The red-haired guy just like snickers, right? He goes, what's the problem? He goes, what is that about? That is a weird response.
It's like saying,
I heard the first half. What did you say?
I said, it's like saying, like, we have a whole bunch of them, but it's something we can't just say without just.
Yeah? Okay. So, to put it super simply, and then we're going to try to kind of push past that, is, especially that last guy, his response to like, is that, because we're trying to critique, right? Do you, hey Curtis, do you read that positively or negatively in terms of how we're sort of engaging with the information in the documentary? Because you guys are part of the audience, right? Does that affect you negatively, positively? What do you think? Negatively. All right. Why? Yeah. No. When I say, does it affect you negatively or positively, what I mean is, we'll backtrack just a little bit. The audience, you guys are being argued to, right? This documentary is arguing several things to you at once. At base, it's saying, I'm worth listening to, okay? And that's going to be part of the argument it makes to you. Beyond that, the argument is, well, they're trying to introduce it here. Apparently there's some kind of problem with technology. Apparently, maybe there's something we can do about it or we should do about it. They're going to make those arguments to you too, right? But if argument number one here in the opening scene is that there's some kind of problem, right? How are they doing so far in making that argument to you? Are they doing a good job? Are they doing a bad job? What do you think? Yeah.
The fact that they're also hesitant to answer out of that, or just like makes them nervous to answer. Like the folks that created all this stuff, they're nervous to answer it.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of worrisome, and that kind of makes you think like, oh, maybe there really is a problem. Like,
Well, the one guy, yeah, first of all, it should be noted, all of them are like super connected. The one dude was the president of Pinterest. That was like his second gig, you know? He was like, oh, I was in charge of Facebook monetization. The other guy helped invent Google Drive, the Facebook like button. I know these seems like, a lot of these are things you guys take for granted. Like, again, people had to make these. Like, they didn't exist before some of the people that are talking here, right? So they're super connected. My favorite is the one guy who said he talked to lawyers for like 8 months. And he is actually very nervous. He's kind of like, oh my God, we're going to do this, okay. Why, and this isn't quite what we were asking before, we'll come back to that, but that guy in particular, the guy that seemed kind of nervous, mentioned lawyers. What's he worried about, first of all, just so we're on the same page?
this is something going to be used against them.
Well, for what? Like they're all here to talk about like Facebook, Google, Instagram, all that stuff. He mentions lawyers. What's he primarily worried about? Getting sued. Yeah. He works for those companies. He probably knows some things that he may or may not be allowed to talk about. That's how it works. Big companies like that when you're high up. He's worried about his brains getting sued out. Yeah, basically. Why? Why would he be worried about what is that communicating to you here in the first 2 minutes of the documentary? Like, what are we gonna maybe talk about, do you think, if that guy is that nervous?
There's bad things going on with the technology.
At these big companies, right? These big companies with billions, sometimes trillions of dollars thereabouts. Yeah, they could ruin a person financially if they wanted to, is sort of the implication there, right? So you have these people at the beginning with a lot of knowledge, but it's communicated that their knowledge is sort of coming up against a lot of power. These companies have a lot of power, a lot of means that an individual person cannot hope to match, right? That makes that one guy very nervous. Now, getting back to our earlier question about what's the problem, I don't think the red-haired gentleman, his name is Tristan, he's in a lot of it, he doesn't strike me as super nervous with that scoff, right, that laugh. When he laughs at the question, what is the problem? What do you guys think What kind of an answer is that to that question?
We're gonna start.
So it's similar to the other people, but I want to push on a little bit because again, we're trying to think about specific signs, right? If you walk away from nothing else from this class today, you could do the homework, right? The first woman that they asked the question to, they don't give her a lot of time, but she does. She kind of looks off. She's like, okay. The second guy says he's trying to. He wants a succinct answer, right? He even kind of nervously brushes his hair back, and he's like, "There's a lot of problems." And then the red-haired guy just goes. So those are all the same answer, basically, right? But just like we said with I'm sorry, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So Tristan's there is a little bit different. How is his different from the guy who has an answer? It's just, he just says he doesn't have one, right? Maybe we can go back a little bit and watch it again, because it's right. Right? So, how is his a little bit different from those other folks?
Because he already knows that there's not this one problem.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Like, it's like, one, everybody, things already said that there could be more than one problem.
Yeah.
And when it comes to him, he's just like, you act like it's just one problem.
So, okay, so again, the point you're kind of making there is, again, his answer is super similar to the other answers, right? But his in particular, he laughs at the question, right? That's what he's doing. When you laugh at a question, that can mean a couple things, but in this particular context, it suggests what about the question?
It's like they're trying to get one answer, but there's millions when there's like literally more than one answer.
Okay, so it suggests the question itself is flawed.
Right.
Cool. And again, not because there isn't maybe a problem, but because it's so, big, so vast, multitudinous, there's an SAT word for you, right? That to sit there and ask somebody, hey, just tell me what the problem is laughable, right? He literally laughs at it. Now again, since we got that in the air, I want to ask you, the documentary just started. It is arguing to you, like we're going to look at the opening credits after this. It's arguing to you, hey, the rest of this is worth watching, right? This is basically the hook of the documentary, this section. Is it doing that? Is it not? You say yes. Why do you say yes?
Because he already know what he about to say, so I want to know what he's gonna say.
So it makes you curious. Is that fair? If you're nodding, I can't tell. Okay. No glasses, man. You gotta help me out.
Right.
I'm very blind. Yeah, I think, because again, let's give it the full context here. Describe for me real quick, any of you can do this, in a sentence, what kind of people are they interviewing? Like all 5 or 6, however many people it is here at the beginning. What do all these people have in common? How would you sum those folks up?
They're big apps, Facebook apps, Google apps. They're something that we all have recently been on part of.
Yeah, they're not just experts in that field, but like they worked on it. Like they literally made all these things that we use, right? Why use those people, do you think?
They would have more knowledge about something.
Yes, hopefully.
They would realize more things.
Huh?
They would realize more things about the problem.
Because they're closer to it? Sure. Okay, so now, again, because we're in rhetorical analysis territory and everything we've done so far. We're trying to take that next step into critique. I hope this is kind of an easy question. How does using these people affect the viewer?
Because it brings interest to the viewer.
Brings what?
It brings interest to the viewer because simple type, it shows that these are apps I use every day. So
Yeah.
they're like, oh, these people made it, so it may be onto something here.
Why? I know that's a silly question, but why?
Because maybe they know more than I know about it.
But you said you use it every day, right? You should know a lot. Why would they know more?
Because they worked on, they made it.
Okay, good. Now again, the reason I pushed you on that, I know we all know that, right? But every time I talk to you guys about breadcrumbs, about showing your work, leading me through your thought process, those are the kinds of things you got to spell out for me, right? On the page. So I think we would all generally agree that using these people, again, who aren't just experts, but actually made the stuff, like had their hands in it metaphorically, putting together Instagram and everything else, they would know more than us about both how it works and potentially what some of the problems are, right? Just because they're closer to it than we could ever be, even if we do use it every day. So we're talking about, among other things, credibility, right? These folks, before we ever get into any other part of the documentary, seem, I think, super credible, right? You may not agree with everything everybody says, but at the end of the day, I think all of us would agree, these guys know their stuff. Fair? Okay. I assume some of you are nodding out there in the darkness again.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can't see. And so for this guy to laugh at that question suggests that the question is maybe a little bit silly, suggests that the person asking the question, what? What does it suggest about the person making the documentary, the interviewer now? He laughs, if he laughs at that question, what does Tristan maybe know that the documentarian does not?
That the documentarian is thinking that there's a single problem and there's multiple.
Okay. I think that's fair, right? Again, I would ask, what does that do to the success rate of the documentary here? That the people being interviewed seem to, at this stage, know a good deal more than the people making the documentary. Yeah.
The fact that we know that there are multiple problems now makes it want to watch more into the documentary and learn more about it.
Yeah.
Better look.
Yeah, so you're curious, like we said before, which is good. Okay, all I'm trying to get us thinking about real quick is, again, does it matter that the person interviewing doesn't seem to know as much as the people they're interviewing? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
In some ways yes, in some ways no.
Okay. Here and then somebody over here. Why do you say that?
I say in some ways yes because like maybe it's something that they don't know yet that they're trying to learn about.
Okay.
That they're trying to learn more about.
Sure.
And then in some ways no because simple that you're the person that's interviewing them.
Yeah.
More about your question more than anything.
Sure, but again, we just said these people are more expert than anyone, right?
Right.
So, I guess what I'm asking, especially that second point he made, he says maybe yes, maybe no, right? You can kind of argue both. What I'm wondering is, which position do you feel like is stronger? Is it either the people conducting these interviews are trying to learn, probably know a good bit about this stuff, but not as much as they could, and they're asking these people, Tristan scoffs, like, oh, that's such a silly question, right? And maybe that's a positive, right, to see it that way. Or is it more on the negative side of the spectrum, where as a viewer, we expect the people making the documentary to know more about it, to be more knowledgeable, I suppose. What do you guys think? Is that a hand? I can't tell.
You have asked that question again.
I'm trying to put it simpler. I mean, again, like, do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that the people conducting the interview here, right now anyway, don't seem to know as much about the subject as the people they're interviewing?
I don't think it's a bad thing.
You think it's a bad thing?
I said I don't.
Oh, okay. Why?
Because it's like you trying to learn something. But like, I can see. Did you say earlier like would the views go down?
What happened?
Something about the views or something.
The views.
I don't know what you said.
I don't know, dog.
I don't know. I feel like the separation between like we regular people and they they're not. So
Yeah. Well then, I like that idea. So then, are you saying there's interviewers and there's interviewees, okay? Interviewees are the people we see on camera, right? People answering questions. Interviewers are the people behind the camera. We never see those folks. With that point in mind, who are the interviewers more like? Us. I would agree with that. Now again, I would ask, is that a good thing or a bad thing? How does that affect the argument this documentary is trying to make to you, the viewer?
Maybe like us, we might not know the same, like what questions to ask.
So they're not quite where you guys are at. They're like in this weird middle ground between you and the people they're interviewing. Like they're knowledgeable, but they're not as knowledgeable as these experts.
I feel like it makes it more relatable because we both learning at the same time, like the people like recording it and us, like the people watching it learning from.
Yeah.
It's like,
Sure. Well, and again, that's kind of like, because I can see what Trey is saying here, right? About potentially positive and potentially negative. But especially when we're thinking about what we're talking about, which is always important, right? Like if I had you guys watch a documentary about the water cycle, remember that from 3rd grade or whatever? And the interviewer seemed like he was asking silly questions about how that works, so much so that one of the experts scoffed. You'd be much more justified in thinking, they should really know that. They got like charts and that's not very hard to get a handle on. But here, what are we arguing in this opening scene? We're arguing, like we keep saying, that there is a problem. There are maybe multiple problems, and they're hard to name, right? That's kind of the whole point here. Even the experts they're talking to, the people that know more than anybody, are like, yeah, this is tough. We'll do our best, kind of communicating, we'll do our best to answer this. And if that's true, then how can the interviewer know, right? So they're closer to us, like some of you have intimated, right? I think over here we kind of said, but they're not exactly us. They know more than we do, but not so much that they can't learn along with us too. So we relate to them. They're almost like a guide, maybe, is how we're thinking of it, right? Like through a museum. That guy knows some stuff, but he'd be lying if he didn't admit he reads off the thing occasionally, you know. He doesn't know it all. That's kind of nice, I think. To convince you that there is a problem at all, to convince you that it's something worth learning about, right? For the rest of this documentary. So what we're kind of working toward here, with those couple pieces we picked up, is a positive critique, right? It makes you curious, like we said a hot minute ago. But all these other things too get wrapped up in that idea. Like, how does that curiosity work, right? Specifically. I think we just kind of worked our way through it. What troubles me is I don't think a lot of you are writing it down, but you'll do better next time. Anything else you guys notice? There's a lot in this opening scene, actually. Did anybody notice that quotation at the very beginning?
Oh, the vast means something about vast interest in order.
I'm paraphrasing, but basically, nothing vast exists without a curse.
Yeah.
Like nothing vast, by the way, that's a little bit bigger than big. Like, I don't know if anyone saw my son. He came in today. I don't know if you were really early, you would have saw him. He considers me to be rather big. But if Shaq walked in, he would need a different word for Shaq, you know? Big doesn't really work for Shaq. As humans go, he's pretty vast. Well, nothing vast exists without a curse. I bet if you asked Shaq about his knees, he wouldn't mind being a half foot shorter. You know, something like that. I'm making jokes out of Shaq's life, and I'm sure he's doing fine. But did you guys notice who said that quotation? Huh? Sophocles. Look at you. Very fancy. Do you happen to know who that is? Go for it. Who is he? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. He was Greek.
He was a Greek writer.
Yeah, playwright.
He did one of the writes on Greek mythology.
I didn't quite hear what you just said.
Did he not do one of the things on Greek mythology? Or was it before that?
Pretty much everything back then had to do with Greek mythology, sure. But the point I want to make to you is, basically none of you, outside of Trey, probably, had any idea who Sophocles was. You're going to leave class forgetting who he was. But I'm curious. That's how the documentary starts. It's a good quotation, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but it's worth thinking more about. We might next time. Nothing vast exists without a curse. I'm paraphrasing. But then they say who it's from. Isn't that always kind of key to the quotation? Like if somebody posts a quotation on Twitter, and then after that they cite somebody you've never heard of, doesn't the quotation kind of take a hit? Versus if it's like your favorite singer or a basketball player or if I can pick, I don't know, whatever you're into, right? If it's somebody you like, especially if it's somebody you look up to or somebody you've heard of, it has a little more weight behind it. So a name like Sophocles, who again, most of you have probably not heard of, okay? But what do you think when you hear a name like that? You get a great quotation and it's followed by Sophocles. Yeah.
I actually read Socrates, so I don't know, so I read it wrong.
Sure, like, hey, but that's pretty close. And to be honest,
That's what made me think of, so.
sure. Well, why? Why does it make you think of Socrates?
I assume the guy was like a philosopher, but I guess it's a
Again, back then, there were like 6 jobs. So if you were a playwright, you were damn near a philosopher too most of the time. It wasn't super, But yeah, he's an ancient Greek guy. We have these words from a dude who lived thousands of years ago. And they're pretty smart words, and they apply, according to the documentary, to what we're going to talk about, right? That's how they introduced the book. That's their version of, oh shit, you bought my book. That's how they start, right? A little different in tone. But with this ancient Greek name that you might not even recognize. We'll move on, but I just want you to notice, again, it's not always just what people say, right? It's what we kind of talked about thus far. Things are going to happen in this documentary that are interesting. What does it do, for instance, especially if you've seen the rest of the film, that Tristan, when he first sits down, what happens?
He didn't say nothing yet.
Huh?
He hasn't said nothing.
No. What happens before he says anything?
He checks his phone.
His phone goes off. It buzzes, and he checks it. They could have cut that. That doesn't have to be in the documentary. Why did they keep it?
Because that's their subject. That's their topic.
Yeah. Can we push on that a little bit? And look, there's plenty more we could talk about, but we'll move on to the next scene after this. Why keep that?
Just emphasizing, like, look, like, even in the documentary, we can't do a documentary without this thing taking over,
It's literally everywhere, right? Starts the damn documentary. One of their experts who is going to spend most of the time in the camera, in front of the camera, when compared to everybody else, right? At one point, he's going to go talk to Congress. He's like super involved in this stuff. He sits down, first thing in the documentary, gets comfortable. Oh, got a text or something, right? Like immediately, the problem that they can't quite name is intruding into the interview. That's wild. I could just imagine the guy behind the camera, his eyes getting really big, like, oh, this is perfect. We're keeping this, right? Okay. I only point that out, again, because all kinds of things are going to happen. It's not just what people say. So you want to try to stay on top of it. All right, we're going to watch the next scene. You don't need any context. You watched it. It's right after this. So again, anything you notice, now hopefully we're warmed up a little bit. Absolutely. If anybody says anything that you find interesting, jot it down. But again, what do you see happen, especially in this next scene? I'm not going to spoil it. You'll see it. We're going to go somewhere different, right? What's the effect of that? Moving from these folks, these experts, to where we're at in about 20 seconds. Okay. hard shift in tone, I think, in that next scene, right? How would you, I mean, I don't want to dive into specifics, but first, really quickly, how is this scene different from the one we just talked about?
Kind of shows what's going on.
In terms of what?
In terms of the problems that they can talk about, but yet the problems that we need to see for ourselves.
So they're giving you, it's like rapid fire there at one point, right? Like a laundry list of all of these, what would you call, I mean, they're real world implications, I guess, right? Is kind of what we're getting at. But they're also, I don't know, how would we put it? Like they're, part of this is we're going to have some similar issues to what these guys have, right? Like how do you describe this stuff? It's almost like all of these problems, it seems like have a similar root or have a similar issue under them, but then you see all the different problems and they're all pretty different. Some of them are very violent, some of them are very, I'm gonna be honest, dumb. Like when she asks if you can get the coronavirus from eating Chinese food, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm forgetting some of the other ones. Snapchat dysmorphia, are you guys familiar with this term? No? Okay. It's a very real thing, largely affects young women, but can affect men as well, where you grow up with all these filters, you grow up with all these crazy apps where you can like fix your face and all this stuff, you know what I'm saying? But some people growing up in a world like that have become so conditioned to needing to look like that that they then go get plastic surgery to look like that. Like it's kind of sketchy, man, to put it mildly. But they hit you with all these problems. How do they do that, by the way? Huh? So the first way they do it, I call it a dramatization. That's not really fair, but they introduce this narrative element, right? This story. We're going to be with this family throughout the documentary. And I have to be perfectly clear in case it wasn't obvious. These people are actors. Everybody knows that, right? Okay. You'd be surprised, man. These people are actors, but the idea is what? Like,
Make it seem like they're actually pretty
good. Is there anything that sort of communicates that idea just from the jump here? How do they appear to be just like an everyday family? Can you guys point to anything you might have noticed?
The argument siblings, just the kind of.
Yeah?
The structure between the families are pretty average for today's society.
What's that?
The setting, where it's kind of like.
Okay. Before we even see the family, right? We're kind of zooming over the houses a little bit, just like a suburb, city type area. Looks kind of nice, you know. These folks live here. Is kind of the idea. Then you go in the house. Siblings are bickering. Can super relate to that. Sure. Anything else? Anything else seem everyday family stuff in that scene? What are the people doing? Who are the people? Can we name all the people in the family? Not by name necessarily, but
mom, dad.
the mom and dad.
We got two sisters, one brother.
Yeah, there's like, it seems like the brother's a middle child.
Yes.
Older sister, younger sister. Cool. Pretty standard family. What are they doing in that scene? Anything strike you what those folks are doing? They're getting ready for like dinner or something. Yeah, mom's doing something. Looks like the brother is helping move stuff to the table.
And dad's on his phone, and mom is as well as the Bible.
I heard some of that. Dad's on his phone. Yeah.
Close the daughter,
Wait, yeah, what's Isla is her name. What is she doing?
she's on the phone and then she ignores her mom as well.
And it kind of, this documentary has an interesting way of trying to show you what these people are doing when they're doing it, right? Like they use some kind of computer effects to kind of put next to them what they're looking at so you can see it too. What is Isla doing? She's on like Instagram or something, right? What is she looking at? Instead of listening to her mother or helping with dinner or even talking, she says very little in this entire movie. hold on, let's go look at it real quick. What's she looking at?
She's looking at the stuff on her Instagram, people,
Just pictures.
yeah.
There's a girl, maybe having a birthday, it looks like. I think right above that might be a cat. Kind of hard to tell. Right here, it's two babies. That's it. She's just looking at other people's lives. That's it. She's not commenting. She does that later. And again, that's a very small thing. It's very specific, but it's kind of interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
They have the news audience to go and it says making our kids depressed or something like that while she's scrolling through it.
It's kind of, it is interesting. There are moments they will overlay sort of dialogue and other things from other scenes into this narrative, right? What's the function of doing that, do you think? What might the documentary be trying to communicate to you here? We can listen to it real quick. They go to Snapchat dysmorphia, depressed. Yeah. What's the function of that? Why do that? Showing you what she's looking at, showing you what she's not doing because her mother's asking her to, and she doesn't even respond, by the way, which would not go well in my house.
It showed how it brings people.
How it does what?
It showed how that one thing, how people react to that one thing.
What one thing?
Oh,
Okay. How do they react to it?
as so if they make it where they're ignoring people
Yeah.
and how it can bring depression to it.
Yeah, and again, part of what this opening scene is doing is that laundry list of problems, right? Some of which I imagine you guys have heard about, by the way, from your parents or from whomever. Maybe you had a person come in and talk to your school, right? One of those super fun things that people still do, I think. But I guess what I'm getting at is, because there's different audiences for a documentary, right? Primarily, I think this documentary isn't necessarily aimed at you guys. Primarily, I think it's aimed at people like me, right? I got kids. Quite honestly, I know my oldest is 5. He's gonna want a phone in the next, 5 years? 7 years? Something like that. Scares the shit out of me, I'll be honest with you. Just for all kinds of reasons. So I think it's primarily aimed at guys like me, a little bit older than you folks. But I still think much of what the documentary is trying to do can resonate with you guys, right? So I'm curious, by taking these news reports, that again, I would wager you guys have kind of heard that stuff before, right? Maybe even some of you, when it comes up in the document, like your eyes kind of glaze over, you're like, all right, this again, right? It feels like an after school type thing. Like, don't do drugs, like that kind of stuff, you know? But does it change anything to intersperse those news reports with this family? Specifically, the one that we've highlighted, Isla. You say, I'm trying to remember exactly what you said. You said it breaks people or something? Is that what you said?
It changes people's, that one device changes people's reactions.
Well, I would say their interactions,
Right.
right? In what way? Like, how would we describe?
The way, like they already said, the way how that one device to bring depression.
Yeah.
It's a way if we ignore
Well-
people in real life, in our real life, the phone is our reality.
Yeah, it becomes its own little world, right? I'm sorry I talked about that a little bit. But if we can get as specific as we can, like another thing I want you guys to think about, how is Isla different in this scene from the rest of the family?
She's off to herself, like not talking to the family, just by herself.
Okay.
Like isolated,
She is. She very much is, right? The entire family, even the siblings who are bickering, they're still talking to each other, right?
She's a younger age, so they're like, well, why is she getting going now? Why does she already have to start out with like that older girl?
The older sister is pretty upset about it. She doesn't think it's good for her.
Right.
Younger brother's like, it's fine, man. The mom is defeated, which again, I totally feel. I feel the mom on that. But yeah, it's the implicit argument here around all the, again, headline sort of stuff you guys have probably heard before in one way, shape, or form. It'll make you depressed, it'll whatever. What it shows you is a much more, I think, how did we describe the family setting? Somebody had a good word. What does it seem like, this family? How would you describe them? A what? Modern? What's another word? What? Average. Every day, right? And if that's true, and I think most of us would agree, right? Just in how they live with each other, how they talk to each other, whatever. Isn't the argument also Isla is having like an average problem?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say she's depressed right here, right? I wouldn't say she's having all these kinds of problems, although she has some issues later in the film. But at this point, she is isolated from her family. They're trying to sit down to dinner. Communal dinner. That's one of those family things, right? You see it in movies, but maybe you've occasionally had it as well. Especially as a teenager, you're not really down with that stuff, but it's kind of nice. Get together with your family, talk to each other, even if you're bickering. Right? And she's shut off by that. Never says that. None of the news reports say that, right? It shows you that. That's important. That's an argument the film is making to you. When it comes to a critique, again, you would first describe what she looks like, what's going on, which you gave us the perfect word, isolated, okay? And then after that, the question is, do you guys think, just right now, and again, I'm putting you on the spot, do you think the film does a good job of communicating this idea, or a bad job, because it doesn't like come right out and say it? What do you think?
I think it's a good job because instead of saying it, it will show what's actually properly, it will show something that you should already see.
Okay. Why is that? I mean, why is that, according to your line of argument, better than maybe like having they could find a news report where somebody's like, it isolates teens, like I'm sure people have said that.
I'm pretty sure they could find about something about when teens bring themselves to death from anything. But at the end of the day, it's rather much better than saying it, showing something that actually happens in the world.
Sure. Okay. I don't mind that much. So that's even kind of an old idea. You want to show rather than tell, Is your hand up? I can't tell. Go for it.
I mean, I don't know if it's the right word, but all of us kind of become desensitized to some of the stuff, like.
What stuff?
Like, even though, okay, so we've heard, like you said, they can show us the news reports and stuff, but
Yeah.
the fact of showing us the family at the same time helps us make that connection, like, wait a minute, that actually does apply to me, that actually does apply to my life.
Good.
I don't have to just sit here and listen to it, that actually does make sense, I need to hear that.
So, well, especially something you said, I don't have to sit here and just listen to it, right? It can feel like sometimes, again, especially maybe in your position, because most of your lives, you've been talked at. You know what I'm saying? I mentioned my 5-year-old. I do a lot of talking at him. Don't do this. Get off that. Please put that down, right? Like a lot of this. It can feel like sometimes, especially when the news is talking about maybe your age group or issues your age group might face, that you're being talked at rather than to. Is that fair? Like, I think it's kind of what we're saying over here. If that's the case, you could argue perhaps that the news sections, while they do make interesting arguments, they point out interesting issues, those aren't as effective on you guys, right? Could even turn some of you off with that laundry list. We didn't even talk about terrorism, by the way. They named that one too. They show, I think, ISIS and like some other stuff. Yeah, and you guys have heard that before, and you maybe you hear it so often you are somewhat desensitized, which is a whole other problem, but it's real. Might you argue then that the documentary, one way to combat that problem, is to have this family? Look, you guys know the news. We know you're not gonna. Okay, fine. We'll show that stuff, but then we'll get right into this average, everyday family with their average, everyday problems. Isla is just isolated in this scene on her phone. Something you guys take for granted, but when you compare her to everybody else in her family in this moment, it doesn't seem great, right? You would want, I think, an 11-year-old girl to be able to talk to her mother, right? Help with dinner or don't, but at least say something to your mom. Jesus Christ. And we all appreciate that that's an issue. And it brings it into the home. That's something that one of you said much earlier we can relate to, right? We know what that's like. Is your hand up, Grace?
No.
Oh, okay. You're a complete blur, so I thought. Okay. Anything else you guys noticed in that scene? Anything stuck out to you at all?
They say that fake news, how they say a lot of it's just fake news instead of real.
A lot of stuff online. One guy even calls it, says we moved from the information age, which is what they called it, more or less when the internet was invented, in the late 80s, early 90s, into the disinformation age, he says. What does that mean to you guys? I'm actually super curious. What does that mean? Do you guys have any concept of like disinformation?
It means that we're not actually focusing on real facts, we're focusing on the stuff that we hear around town,
Something you hear what?
around the world.
Well, I feel like you said around town.
Right.
And I don't think that's accurate. I don't think around the world is accurate either. Where do people tend to get most of their information? Fucking Twitter or something. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to curse less at you guys. Some person who I have words for, but I won't give them to you, just decides to post a thing. And it's got statistics in it, so like, it must be true. And then a bunch of other people see it and repost it, and it kind of takes off. Meanwhile, none of it's true, right? But we weirdly just expect it to be true for some reason. A lot of us do this. Most people these days get their news from Facebook and Twitter, which is terrifying. And yeah, that's one of the big problems in the film. They're kind of introducing it here. This question of disinformation, fake news, you've heard it called. Yeah. Another way to think of all this, I keep calling it a laundry list. It's almost like when you guys write an in-class essay, I know you guys know those pretty well, and they tell you to do a quick outline before you start. That's not really going to be in your paper. Maybe it'll be in your introduction real fast, That's basically what this part is. Everything you see, boom, 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 real quick, they're going to touch on most, if not all of those things throughout the movie. But it's almost like they spread them out on a table in front of you right here. These are all the things. We're going to touch on all these in one way or another. Also, Isla's isolated. That's also part of it, right? We don't say that one by name. We just show it to you. But all these things we're going to lay out for you. Put your hand up, Trey.
Yeah.
Oh, be careful. You're very close. Anything else you guys notice?
How they all say that the other child is influenced the other.
How they did what now?
How they saying that the other child's more disconnected because she doesn't have a phone.
Yeah, she's what's your opinion on the older sister anyway? What's her deal?
I mean, that's like a typical older sister.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't have one, so I'm
Yeah, it's like I do. So I feel like she probably didn't have it when she was 11.
So what's your opinion on that? Like,
I think she thinks it's unfair that her younger sister had a phone before.
so just so I'm clear, I want to actively not put words in your mouth. So are you saying she's jealous?
Yeah. I think so.
Huh?
I'm just saying that. That's how my older sister is.
I mean, in some ways, I
Yeah,
can
that's
say
true.
that, but yet at the same time, I think she has a point. Who wants to stay on the phone all day when you have the actual world in your hand?
Yeah.
I feel like she'd be on her phone a lot also.
Well, but she actively doesn't the kind of what they're saying is like she's decided not to have one. She couldn't have had one when she was 11 because they didn't exist they existed, but not like we have today. But she's decided for herself now because the middle kid has one, the brother or whatever, he has one.
Right.
She decided she doesn't want to. But you're saying her primary motivation there is like sour grapes.
Yeah. I mean, our siblings really don't want what's best for us. They just like.
Okay.
make it.
I have thoughts on that, but I want to let you guys hash it out a little bit. Yeah.
It's just kind of ironic, like, 'cause it shows, like, now the middle child kind of offended the whole technology thing, but he's still kind of moderate. Kind of shows, like, the younger they get, the more the younger you get in generations, the more the technology has an impact on them.
That's an interesting argument that, again, gets implied here. No one comes right out and says it, but I think it's fair to consider that the oldest sister is kind of like, I don't want anything to do with it. Middle is like, it's fine, you don't have to do it, but we're, and then Isla's like, don't talk to me. Right?
I feel like with social media, you become the product of the environment you're around. And maybe when she was older, social media wasn't as big as it was today because of the lack of like a smartphone. And then
Yeah, well, again, I'll give you guys a brief history lesson. So, as old as, I mean, what? In the movie, the two eldest siblings are in high school, so she's like 17 or 18. When she was 11, that was 7 years. 2013, yeah, smartphones existed. Oh man. I got my bachelor's in 2011. I had a smartphone. It was not as cool as the ones we have now. It was like an iPhone 2 or whatever. Okay, whatever it was back then. But you could get online, you could do stuff. You had social media. Was not as, again, prevalent as it is today, but it did exist. And yeah, she probably didn't have one when she was 11. Is it, I don't want to put words, I want to ask you guys. Knowing that, and you may not have, okay, before, but knowing that all that stuff did exist, why do you think, because again, this might be an argument the film is making, why do you think she, the oldest sister, didn't get a smartphone when she was 11, but now Isla does?
Because, like the mom has said, she didn't want her child to feel left out or sad about the fact that she doesn't have one.
Because everybody around her does.
Right.
Okay. What'd you get, man?
I was gonna say it might not have been much of a need.
Well, what makes it a need? That's what we're getting at. It's funny you use that word too.
It really is.
Well, but we're talking about Isla here.
Well, yeah, that was the case. Yeah, maybe.
Well, I mean, to be real blunt, do any of us need a smartphone?
No one needs it.
No.
But everybody wants one first.
Sure, but at this day and age, that line gets kind of blurry, right? It feels a little like a need sometimes, maybe. But the mom basically says she had to get Isla one. When you feel like you have to do something, we've talked about this with Ansari actually, in a different context. What does that mean? She felt like, and I think we all agree the way we're talking about it, she had to get Isla that phone.
Because I think if she didn't get Isla the phone, Isla would probably be mad, disappointed, or angry with her that she didn't get one.
Well, what's the implication? Because she says all the kids around her have one.
It should be like a social outcast.
She'd be a weirdo.
Yes.
Look at that weirdo.
Like, she would, in other words, like what other people used to call back the other day, she'll be a witch or something because she doesn't have a phone.
I mean, you guys remember middle school.
Right.
Yeah. You don't want to stand out in middle school. Kids are brutal. So, the mom is saying she has to get Isla a phone so that Isla will what?
Look normal.
Do what?
Look normal.
Look normal. Fit in. Yeah. That's, what's up?
It like forces you to conform.
Good. That's the word a word like it anyway. When she says she has to do it, she's not saying she chose it, right? She felt compelled, she felt forced to do it. Now again, the implication there is, because I think we're right, I would hard disagree. I don't know that the oldest sister is jealous, but maybe she is. But at the very least, I think we can agree she probably didn't have one when she was 11. Well, the implication there is what? Why? How did the mom maybe feel differently then?
Become more prevalent in society.
More normalized, more prevalent. And as a result of that, if you don't want to stand out, Like Isla doesn't want to stand, like Isla's mother doesn't want her to stand out, right? You got to get the phone. You have to. That's the language they're using, right? That's interesting. So, kind of piggybacking on that earlier implication you said about that there's like gradients to these kids, right? In having the phones and like being interested. I think that's fair, and it's something I honestly hadn't considered, but now what we're also saying is, you look at the, say the oldest sister is 18, Isla is 11, that's 7 years. So we're saying in 7 years' time, the world has changed in such a way that we've gone from, it's cool to have a phone, you know, to you kind of have to. And it's not the usual have to that we think about, right? Like if you're diabetic, you have to have insulin. Or hell, if you're a human, you have to have food, right? Like, no, this is have to so you fit in. So people don't look at you funny. Like if you walked out of this room and you saw somebody take a flip phone out of their bag, you would all notice. What the hell's wrong with that guy? Right? It's weird when people, I've seen it, not very often. It's like a unicorn out in the wild, right? Oh shit. He's got an antenna, oh my God, right? It'd be weird. It'd be really weird. And you would have, wouldn't you, you would judge that person for that. That's what she's worried about with Isla. She knows that that's part of the deal. The point I'm making to you here with the last couple minutes we have, again, a lot is going to be said in this documentary, which is super important, and you can talk about it, okay? But there's all kinds of implications, things you see, just interactions, especially the family has. Never mind when the middle child, he's going to get way more into social media than he is at this stage. And it's what? Yeah, well, by the end, yeah. But even before then, he's just like on it more, right? He kind of goes from take it or leave it to, oh, you have to take it all the time. And they dramatize that, right, in a way that, because I know some of you haven't seen it. But it's interesting. So I just want you guys also focused on things you notice. What are some implied arguments outside of simply, you know, what that Tristan guy might say, or what some of these sort of experts might think? All of that's important. There's plenty of other stuff to think about. You could just focus on the family. I'm being real with you, if you wanted to, in your paper. There's enough just with them. You don't even need the other parts of the documentary necessarily. So all of that's available to you. Questions about any of that? Okay. Very quickly. Okay. Very, very quickly. I want to spend a couple minutes making sure you guys at least feel comfortable with the homework. So, on Courstin, it asks for, I believe it's 3 signs or elements. All that means, that's what we've been talking about the whole time today. Honestly, that's what we've been talking about for like a month now with Ansari as well. Something specific, right? I want you to be able to point to something in the text. It can be a quotation, but again, just like we talked about here, it can be the differences between the siblings. It can be the way that Isla is very clearly isolated by her phone, right? Anything you can point to and describe for me specifically, that is one sign, that is one element, okay? You need 3 of those. They don't have to be all in the same scene, by the way. They could be all over the documentary. I don't care. I just want them to be specific. The 2 things I want with each one of those, okay? Context. So for instance, if you're going to tell me that Isla is isolated, what's some of the context we would need for that? How do you know she's isolated? She's on the couch by herself.
She ignores her mom.
Doesn't even respond to her mother, which again, I know times are different, but my mom asked me a question, I would have to say something. Jesus. And you get to see what she's looking at. Like, you know that she's like super invested in her phone. That's all very important context to get to the implication that she's maybe isolated by that stuff. And then beyond that, to the best of your ability, I would want a little bit of you thinking about, well, why is the movie trying to argue to us that Isla here in this scene is isolated. It only focuses on her. Why do that? How is she different from other people in her family? Is that important for any reason? Do you know what I'm saying? Any sign or element you pick, all three of them, I want you to do your best at this stage to try to think about why the movie is having you look at that or hear that, right? This is rhetorical analysis. We'll focus more on critique next time. We introduce it this time. But you got to be able to clear that first hurdle of just, why is the documentary putting this in front of you? Okay? What's it trying to do? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. I'll see you guys Wednesday. Thank you.